I wanted to talk a little bit about assessment, and we've been talking about how the curriculum should change, and we've been talking about how, for good or for ill, assessment drives the curriculum, or the informal curriculum, even if we wished we were teaching other things. I'd like to talk about how assessment itself could change through the use of computer technology. So I'll start with talking about what the current state is. Typically, if you're doing a summative assessment, you're doing things which can be scanned by making pencil marks on paper or a human reader. A typical, and I'm using a topic which is a very simple one. So one of the early things that you try and do as a teacher with little children is help them understand representations of number. And one of those is a numeral. And so a typical directed response question might be showing you it and then saying, well, what is this? And the psychometricians will have lots and lots of arguments about what should be a 4 distractor or a 5 distractor question. What should the distractors be? You have to do a whole bunch of these problems to get a real map of what the student is doing. You're pre-selecting, you're pre-printing. There's no differentiation, there's no algorithm. No adaptation to the students. Everybody gets the same test or alternate forms of a test. The other type of question you find is a human-graded question, where somebody might give you the blank device and say, please construct this. And then a human grader has to score. Now, I'm deceiving you a bit here. Nobody would actually give this test to a little child because they probably aren't reading yet. And the math test would end up being a reading test, which is often a problem anyway. So that's though, is a representation of what the current state would be. Now, what we can do outside of the scope of formal exams, and you see this in some of the better instructional technology, is a term which is starting to be coined formative instruction, where there's a blending of the measurement of understanding and the introduction of new concepts. So I'm going to give an example in a moment. You can use, the important thing here is you use the computer to collect and analyze the data. And instead of just getting whether the student has gotten the answer or not, you get some measurement as to how they're getting the answer, and so you can respond differently. Now, in this kind of model, you can have a certain amount of training, which students have in games. Instead of an introductory lecture, you show them how to use a tool. You can level them dynamically, and the reports you get out at the end are lists of competencies. I'm going to show a screen recording of a training session. This is very brief, and the sound is off. So this is a thing you'd find in a Montessori school called a math rack, and you're being asked to do a series of things in any particular order. Can you move a bead? Can you move more than one bead? And lastly, can you tip the rack one way or the other? So notice there's a linked representation of the numeral and the construction of number. This is one representation. So a little on-screen avatar talks to you and tells you about this. If you think about the problem of representing number, if I asked you about how to do 17, how might you do that? Well, one child might do counting with their finger, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Another might group. They might count by 5, 10, 15. Every once in a while, you'll get a child who tips the whole rack and pulls away 3. Now, those are 3 right answers, but the response, in other words, the teachable moment and what you should respond to that child is very different in each case. And without a computer, a very good teacher might be able to do that, but one-on-one. If you have 20 or 30 children in a classroom, the teacher isn't really available in the right way to do this. So what I'd like to do is give you a somewhat longer session. This is a development of number. So before you understand what a numeral is, you're asked to recognize and match. And sometimes the instructions say do it in the smallest number of moves. So they're asking you to strategize early on rather than just count. So that was the case of tipping and taking away. And then you have to identify what the number was. So there's more than one question here, is can you recognize and reproduce, and can you turn it into a number? Now, in an adaptive test, if you start getting them right frequently, it says, well, you must understand this, and we're going to dial the difficulty up quite a bit. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit, because after the computer has done some detection, it starts hiding it and seeing, can you visually remember it? Dial it up a little bit more. Out there. So having finished that, the computer then responds, strangely enough, and I think the phrase was, let's try something tricky, which is usually a cue for something where it's not quite sure you're going to be able to handle it. So it dials up to a rack with 10 wires, so it can be numbers up to 100. And it's only made this jump because it's detected that the person answering the questions might be ready for the jump. So here you're building number sense. It's a very, I mean, in some sense, it's the same topic as that artificial written one I gave, but you're actually getting some good measurement. I won't go too long on this because I have to be mindful of the time. So that's something where, even for something as simple as number sense, where you have to argue that every child should develop that. And they may have to do that by hand, but the computer can assist by asking these probing questions. Now, what does this lead us to? What does summative assessment look like in the world of computer? Well, I think it's going to be a mixture of what you just saw, computer-based formative instruction, where you're getting a data stream along the way, during the year, instead of waiting till the end of the year and getting just one number, yes or no. There'll also be a need, once you have this, you have some time freed up for performance-based tasks, where you have the students do something, and then a larger form of task, which might be a capstone project. My conclusion about this is simply that with some luck and some diligence, the traditional summative assessment could dissolve into the curriculum. And because you have data, you know that the child is developing in a healthy manner, and therefore you don't worry so much about one big test at the end of the year. And you can actually adjust as you go along. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.